It's been more than 20 years since a ban on LGBT plus personnel serving in the military was lifted, but its impact still remains for many who were dismissed, convicted and sometimes imprisoned before that policy came to an end.
Now, an independent review set up by the government will try to establish how best to help those affected. Josh Parry reports.
The year is 1995. John Major is the Prime Minister. Take that topping the charts. David was sent to military prison. His crime, being a gay man.
They discovered a couple of gay times in my room after a search in my room. Its 2-year investigation began.
When David joined the Royal Air Force as a medic aged 17, he was still discovering his identity.
I put my life on the line for the country going to the first Gulf War. And so, yeah, I was proud of that achievement of helping keep my country safe and knowing that they would do the best they could for me, promote me, get the best out of me. So when I was 21, I ended up finding out I'm gay, so then you've got to lead a double life.
And when that double life was discovered, David realised it would be the end of his military career.
From the moment I admitted to it, I was held in a cell, separate from everyone, and then the trial happened, and then you go, yeah, you handcuffs, you're going into the cell, you're treated like any other prisoner, as if I'd mugged or murdered someone. You're treated the same. Offence, gross indecency on Sexual Offences Act 1956, section 13.
And how has that impacted you when applying for jobs?
On certain offences, they're kept. You don't get rid of them. So as a nurse, I had to go for a job, I had to do what's called enhanced disclosure, and that's where it came out. Now, unless you actually know, it's listed as a sexual offence. So unless you actually know it's the offence of actually being gay, that's quite alarming.
It's thought around 5,000 servicemen and women were affected by the ban on LGBT personnel in the military. It remained in place until the year 2000, when this group of veterans took their fight against the ban to the European Court of Human Rights.
With effect from today, homosexuality will no longer be a bar to service in Britain's armed forces.
He couldn't ever go with me to a naval ball. The way we got round it was that we invited our best female friend.
You look like you're having the time of your life. But not everyone impacted by the policy was dismissed outright. Some, like Patrick, felt forced to resign as they couldn't be fully open about their love lives at work.
There was one time in '88 when I'd met a young man. We fell in love. He was a lovely guy. He was called Dennis. But I learnt something else the second year, and that was he was HIV positive. We knew that one day, as was the case then, he would die. And I knew that at some point there would be a fork in the road.
Unable to tell his bosses about the relationship and terrified of being sent to the other side of the world while his partner was dying, Patrick handed in his 1 year's notice to leave the Navy. Dennis died just 2 days before he was due home for good.
I got up there as fast as I could after his mother had phoned me, and he was still warm. You know, they'd sort of brushed his hair and clean white sheet over him. He's a little side room. I reflected on one thing, that in the past 48 hours, the only two things that had ever mattered to me had gone.
While today's announcement is being cautiously welcomed by LGBT veterans, it's clear there's a long way to go for the military to fully regain their trust. Josh Parry, BBC News.
Well, we're joined now by Caroline Page, the first openly transgender serving officer in the British Armed Forces, who now runs the military charity Fighting with Pride. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Lovely to have you on the show. When you hear stories like that, I'm sure they are not unfamiliar to you. You've probably heard plenty of people with those sorts of experiences.
Morning, Bev. Yeah, absolutely. As charity Fighting with Pride, we've been running 2 years, and in that time we've already engaged with hundreds of veterans who have very, very similar stories. And it's always hits you in the heart when you listen to those stories and realise what's happened to people that we should be valuing. And it's just shameful that nothing's been done to help support them since the ban was lifted, which was 22 years ago. But you have to bear in mind that for some of these veterans, that journey is even longer than that, because they were dismissed in the 60s or 70s or 80s, and they've been living their lives without any kind of support.
And I think lots of people watching at home this morning might be surprised that actually it was so recent, wasn't it? It's actually, you know, it's 22 years ago, but it feels very, very recent that people had to hide and couldn't be themselves.
Yeah, exactly. It's 22 years. January the 12th, 2000 is when the ban was finally lifted. And up until that point, anybody who was LGBT plus within the military had to hide who they were, including myself. I joined in 1980, so you had to hide your identity, you had to hide your sexual orientation because there was this law that said you can't serve. Which was in contradiction to civil law, because it wasn't illegal to be gay within civil society.
And what was it like for you being in the RAF, and then the whole process, I suppose? When did it start for you, and what were those conversations like at the time, and how hard did you have to fight?
Well, I grew up in a military family, so I was already in that environment from a very young age, and my gender identity I became aware of at a very young age, around the age of 5. And that's when I first got the idea that the military wasn't very tolerant to LGBT plus personnel, and my family was a very military family and they weren't happy at all. And I was made to feel like I was broken and this was unacceptable, so I had to hide who I was. All through my childhood. And of course, that doesn't make you not lose track of who you are. I always knew who I was, but I just wasn't allowed to tell people or to express that. And when I joined the military, that continued because I joined an organisation which wasn't welcoming of LGBT plus personnel. And even though I was trans and the ban was known as the gay ban, because it was based on the 1967 Sexual Offences Act, the fact that I was different, that I was LGBT plus, people didn't understand that, and therefore, that wasn't allowed. So you have to hide who you were. And if you're doing a job, you're proud of doing your job, you're doing service, and you're off doing a fantastic role, but you have to hide your own personality and who you are, and do that for, in my case, I had to do that for 19 years. And survive the possibility that I would be outed. And of course, some people weren't so lucky.
What was that like for you, those 19 years? What impact did that have on you?
It was. I had a wonderful job. I was a navigator on fast jets, air defence fighters, Cold War, intercepting Soviet long-range bombers, and then I moved to tactical helicopters. So my job was wonderful. But I was always scared of losing the love of my family, and that was a military family. I knew they wouldn't understand. And I was also worried about what I would lose with friends, and if I was outed, then I would be marched off the base. I would lose my job, therefore my income, therefore my mortgage, therefore my house, which was my sanctuary. I knew I'd lose my family. I would lose absolutely everything. I was really, really lucky. I managed to hide through that. But those people who weren't so lucky, and it only took a rumour or a phone call or something like that, and all of a sudden the Special Investigations Branch is involved, and then all sorts of horrendous stories from the veterans that we speak to.
So when you hear about the Ministry of Defence launching this review into the impact of that ban, obviously that's good news, but that means there's going to be all sorts of more stories, I would imagine, coming out of the way people were dealt with.
It's brilliant news. So it's part of the Veteran Strategy Action Plan, which is a range of measures for veterans. But of course, the independent review is really, really important to us at Fighting with Pride, because that's what we've been driving for the last 2 years. So it's fantastic news to see it. But that doesn't mean to say, right, that's it, we can all relax now. That's just the start of things to come. And there's an awful lot of work that now needs to be done to capture those stories, capture those experiences, find out what happened to our veterans, and do something about it.
Caroline, thank you so much for coming and talking to us this morning. It's really fascinating to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.